you, everybody, for attending today's webinar. My name is Brent Hoover. I am the Aiken area SBDC business consultant, and we are here to have a workshop on QuickBooks, particularly that of QuickBooks Online. Accidentally, you may have seen the slide say Introduction to QuickBooks. The technical name for it is QuickBooks 101. Regardless, it still serves the same function. We're also joined by Dr. Snella Portia with the USC Aiken Pacer Center as well. As Carolyn mentioned, throughout the webinar, please put your questions in the chat box, and at the end of said webinar, we will answer said questions. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? And we'll be able to see exactly what our agenda is. So first off, we must educate you on what SBDC can offer, who we are, etc. We will allow Dr. Snella Portia to introduce the USC Aiken Pacer Center, their mission, vision, etc. We'll get into, of course, the platform options that are available through QuickBooks Online. I'm going to talk about the setup, go into some of the fun features, and yes, I will actually test drive QBO briefly as well. At the end of said webinar, we will conduct a review. Now, I will let you know for this case. So in addition to being the business consultant for SBDC, I'm actually a QuickBooks Pro Advisor. I've been certified in all levels of QuickBooks Online, including QB Payroll. Now, you'll find on later throughout that, if you have questions about your individual books for those cases, I would suggest we actually have a one-on-one consultation with our office for that case, because this is going to be the top level overview. But hopefully we're still going to give you plenty of information to take away and apply to your business. So with that said, who are we at SBDC? So we stand for the South Carolina Small Business Development Center. You sometimes may hear us mislabeled as the SBA. No, we're not the SBA. The SBA actually manages us. They're a federal agency for that case, but we are our own government program for that. So what do we offer? No cost and confidential counseling. Because we're funded by all levels of government, whether that's federal, state, and local levels, we therefore are able to offer this counseling at no cost. Because of that, though, we do have to keep track of metrics. So anytime you start a new business, or you create a new job, or you increase your sales, we do keep track of those metrics. We never release them individually, but my boss takes them before Congress to prove that indeed there is an ROI on the taxpayer dollars. That's how we stay available as a no-cost service. In addition to that, we offer confidential counseling. Every year we're bound by SBA confidentiality, and we also have to make sure and sign a new conflict of interest statement to ensure there's never issue on either front. Now, with that said, what do we actually help with? Well, as long as you're a for-profit business in South Carolina, we can assist. I cannot give tax advice, and I cannot give legal advice for obvious reasons. I'm not a CPA or an attorney, but we do have access to quite a bit of resources. I help businesses start up. I help them manage their QuickBooks to a degree. I'm not a CPA, so I'm not going to do the journal entries for you. However, I do help you manage otherwise with the platform. Other resources include such as IBIS World, Vertical IQ, ProfitSense. We can give you access to market research reports that on the open market would cost you quite a pretty penny, but as our client, we pay for the subscription, so we're able to get those reports confidentially to our clients. And last but not least, it's why we're here. We're here to educate. The training workshops. If you'd like to stay up to date on all of our future webinars, you can go to scsbdc.com. You can ensure that you're on our mailing list, and you can see the upcoming webinars as well. Now, we do have some specialty programs. One of them is the Cybersecurity Assistance Program. I've recently taken over as the tech committee team lead, and I also serve with America SBDC as the Cybersecurity Task Force. So I represent that of the Southeastern region. In addition to that, we have plenty of consultants who are specialists in exporting. They're certified in those areas, not to mention, too, government contracting. I help a bit with socioeconomic certification, but we do have specialists should you actually need further assistance with, say, doing a proposal, calculating burden rate, etc. And last but not least, we do have a specialist, Kevin Weir, who focuses on product commercialization. So if you're looking at patents, trying to obtain grants for technological research, etc., those are available to you. So just a brief overview about who we are so you can get a sense of what we have to offer in addition to what we're talking about today. But I wanted to turn the call briefly over to Dr. Snella Portia to give you more information regarding the USC Aiken Pacer Center.
Well, thank you, Brent. Thank you, Mr. Hoover, and thank you to the South Carolina Small Business Development Center for co-hosting this event with us. As always, USC Aiken Pacer Center is very grateful for our collaboration and your support of our students. As Brent mentioned, the mission of the USC Aiken Pacer Center is to provide data-driven, unbiased, rigorous, and research-driven actually support to businesses and our local government. We hope to also provide this unique opportunity to our students to engage in entrepreneurship and cutting-edge research and service. We aspire to be recognized authority and leader in the economic development, business research, and entrepreneurship in the Central Savannah River area. As the executive director, the first executive director of the Pacer Center, I hope that we will continue our cooperation with Small Business Development Center and our good friend, Mr. Brent Hoover, and everybody else at the center to continue to give additional educational services to our community. With all of that being said, thank you, Brent. We appreciate your work today, and I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks, Anela. I appreciate it. Let's get around to actually QuickBooks Online. Now, you may have heard, when you hear QuickBooks, it's usually the common phrase when it goes to record keeping for businesses. It is not the only platform out there. However, with QuickBooks, everything is transitioned to online. If you notice, in the smaller cog was QuickBooks Desktop. QuickBooks Desktop was seen as maybe a priority for CPAs and other small businesses. However, in this case, Intuit has transferred it over to QuickBooks Online. Actually, to be precise, QuickBooks Desktop was discontinued from last May for that variety. You can still get access to it, but they are transitioning towards the ubiquity of QBO Online. Capabilities for it, but they once again like the ubiquity that is available with QuickBooks Online. Now, please understand, your company is considering it has to have some form of record keeping. QuickBooks may be seen as the top name out there, but it is not the only one. Usually when a client comes to me and asks, should I engage QuickBooks? I'm usually going to ask them several questions. Number one, do you have a large daily volume of transactions? If so, QuickBooks is going to allow you to help with that. Do you do a lot of invoicing? Absolutely, QuickBooks can be beneficial. Do you want to synchronize across multiple apps? Do you want to connect in your banking? These are the things. Do you collect sales tax? Do you want to manage payroll? If the answer is yes to the following questions, well, in that case, QuickBooks may be a good alternative for you. Now, it is not the only software out there. You can find some other options such as Wave and Xero, and Xero is spelled actually with an X rather than a Z for those cases. They all function around a QBO interface variety because at the end of the day, as you're going to see in this presentation, you have a chart of accounts. You have to connect in your sales, you're tracking your customers, your vendors. To various degree, these programs all function. But for today's purposes, we're focusing on QuickBooks, okay? Now, if you decide that you're like, I don't need QuickBooks right now, you may end up transitioning into the future. That's perfectly fine. There's quite a few options that allow for that. I have some clients who function entirely in Excel that have migrated over to QuickBooks. Particularly if you're already on desktop, you can still migrate on to online. It is available for that case. Now, once again, we're going to go through some best practices in terms of actually importing data as needed, but I want to stress it out there. We're looking at it from QBO perspective because once again, desktop for that case has been phased out for that variety. So some of the questions you need to ask yourself, if the answer was to the question, do you need QuickBooks to begin with? Well, there are multiple versions of QBO on. You have to identify which one is the best platform for you. So you have to figure out, are you needing inventory? If so, we're probably looking at Plus or Advanced. Why? Because those are the only ones that have the feature for tracking inventory management for those cases. Do you need to keep track of payroll? Do you have W-2 employees? If so, there is the QB payroll option that you can get as a bundle with QuickBooks Online. Do you need to actually have progress invoicing, such as, let's say you start up an architecture company. You're going to have the phased projects. Even as a contractor, you may have phased invoicing. If so, QBO can certainly help you. And last but not least, if you actually need to keep track of time for your employees, perhaps if they're an hourly W-2, well, you can do so through QuickBooks. Now, I included this extra link here with the bsense.com/ASBDC that stands for America Small Business Development Center. you'll see quite a few things in regards to QBO, particularly Phenomenal had one of their promotion codes, I think, for 12 months on that case at a discount. Now, you'll notice with Intuit, they actually have their ongoing discounts as well. Usually those discounts are 50% off for the first 3 months, then you get rolled over into the full price for that variety. Now, what are some of these platforms that are entailing? Well, once again, I stress, you got to find what's right for you. Now, you got simple starts, you got essentials, you got plus, you got advanced. I screen captured this yesterday to show you the current offerings out there. Yes, there is another version of that, and that's called self-employed. It's the bare bones variety for that. However, given many of the capabilities, you probably are maybe better off going at one of these four. The reason Plus is considered to be the customer favorite is, if you'll notice on here, it is the inventory capability. Okay. With inventory management, I still say QuickBooks is probably not the ideal inventory management system. It's limited in terms of what it can do in terms of the accounting method of tracking at that. Not mistaken, you're essentially functioning as the FILO option for that. But you also can go further with this for the variety. You can go into the advanced options that you see here. One of the new features that's come out of the advanced is a spreadsheet sync. It has the capability of actually doing data modeling with Excel. So many times when people look at QBO for this case, they're like, okay, I'm just limited to this platform. No, you're not. And that's why I think one of the things that I think Advanced is doing very well is actually taking the synchronization with Excel spreadsheets. But you can still data model it even regardless out of that. You're going to find you can export quite a bit out of QBO. Most of my clients, I usually are going to be hovering around Essentials or Plus. The reason Simple Start usually doesn't get as much love is because of the user channels and the sales channels. With Simple Start, you're limited to one sales channel, such as, let's say you have PayPal for that. Well, you're kind of stuck with it. You know, if you want to incorporate other elements such as Square, you know, you're probably going to have to upgrade in that case to Essentials. With Essentials, you're going to have 3 users for this case. And a lot of times I do recommend this with QBO for an obvious reason. So you're going to have your own access. Obviously, you are the one who is controlling QuickBooks. However, you do want to have your CPA be brought on board. You can give user access to other people. In this case, you can give full access to your CPA to make sure to go in and see, hey, is there something that needs to be cleaned up? And also, too, you can give admin access. Some of our clients, they give full access CPA, they give admin access to a consultant such as myself. So we're able to actually pull a report really quickly, but you know, we're not able to edit anything and we're not able to make journal adjustments. Therefore, the CPA is allowed to do so. Okay, so I just want to stress there are multiple options out there. The price point may be another factor in deciding which platform to go with. As you can see, Advanced even and its discount is still $100 a month, and then Advancing for $200 for that variety. So these are the 4 that are going for QBO. We can talk a little bit more about QB Payroll as well as another option. Technically, they still have the Desktop Enterprise being offered as another variety, though if you decide to go to the link, you'll see the price tag is much larger than these other platforms, particularly because, if I'm not mistaken, you can use up to 40 users with that enterprise option. Most small businesses are not going to need that. Therefore, they're probably going to go towards one of these 4 options. Once again, a lot of CPAs are using QuickBooks to help manage clients' records, prepare for taxes, etc. Therefore, they like the ubiquity that comes along with QBO. Now, let's talk about QBO to begin with. QuickBooks can either work for you or it can work against you. I prefer it work for you. However, I have seen the latter and not the former. When I have this thing in parentheses for it, or quotations, I should say, my apologies, but all in, you have to consider this. With the process of QuickBooks, let's start with the first thing that matters, and that's the chart of accounts, the COA. Now, if you ever took an accounting class, you're probably like, oh gosh, I didn't want to become an accountant. Well, here's the thing. The more that you can remember from your accounting class, the better, because QuickBooks operates under the accounting principles, okay? Your debits and credits, you may hate them, but guess what? If you ever want to do a journal entry in QuickBooks, it is going to be a necessity to do so. So here's the thing. When you get set up in QuickBooks, to some degree, they're going to have what's the equivalent of what was known as the easy step interview process. Okay, I helped a client go through it on the mobile platform a couple of weeks back. They didn't call it the easy step, but essentially that's what it's doing. It's trying to determine multiple things, like what industry you're in. You know, are you going to need invoicing? How are you going to track your sales? Which platforms are you using to capture those sales? Okay, All of these questions are helping guiding the process of going through. Now you can pay into it as well to assist you further with the QuickBooks setup. Some of that gets worked into free, others you have to pay for. It really just depends on the needs of your business. But once again, I stress, everything revolves around the chart of accounts, okay? So you're gonna start with things such as your bank accounts. Then you're gonna work your way into things like accounts receivable, your cost of goods sold. Now, by default, it's gonna give you a COA chart. What you have to decide is this applicable for you or not? Now, some of you who are on this call may be considering government contracting for the future. Here's a good nugget of advice. Even if you're not going to be a government contractor, if you're just going to be a private business, consider how you set up your chart of accounts in regards to direct cost and indirect. Consider also further things such as fringe, overhead, and G&A. You know, fringe may be the things such as like your FICA taxes that you have to withhold and you have to match. You get into the cases of overhead, which is actually revolving around the production, and then G&A, your general and admin for those, also heard sometimes as the SG&A. Those are the things that are always going to be around depending on whether or not you have a client, right? So you still got to pay for insurance. Insurance in that case is most likely going to show up as a chart of account. The chart of accounts is going to include things from both the balance sheet and the income statement. So for those cases, right, you are probably going to have accounts receivable. You may actually have an inventory account set up, but you're also going to have things for revenue and expenses, okay? So all of this is being bundled together. So I just want to stress, the more that you can know about accounting, it's going to help you much better with QuickBooks. But the first thing is we want to make sure the chart of accounts is set up. So it's going to give you your default. You're going to go through it. You're going to see how far you want to customize it. It really depends on your needs. You can get extremely granular with this. One of my colleagues and I, we were going through a sample company in relation to his clients to see how the chart of accounts was set up. In said case, sometimes it got over detailed and to the extent where it was hard to keep track of everything. I've seen that are bare bones. There's a right balance to be struck. And a lot of it's based on what do you want to track, okay? Consider that with your business. How much do you want to track? I mean, obviously we want to make sure we got revenues correct or expenses are correct. But beyond that, what's the granular detail that you are seeking with this platform? To get the chart of accounts set up, great. We can move on. That may take a couple hours. Usually it's going to be less, but just FYI, sometimes it can take you 3 hours to get it right. Let me tell you, if it does, that's 3 hours well spent. Now, once we have that in play, we can start working on the connections. So if you and your CPA are going through and or you're working with an advisor, your chart of accounts are correct. Now let's get around to the connections. The connections are usually revolving around two things for that variety: your bank accounts and your credit. The good news about QuickBooks Online is you can synchronize with both. All the banks are probably going to be participating. All the credit cards are going to be participating as well. Now, what's the benefit of this? You do not have to sync your bank account. You do not have to sync your credit card. You can manually enter the information. However, you may find that errors will arise if everything is not connected. Now, also, too, what we're testing with the connection is to ensure that there's not an error of the information that's being supplied. One of the things you get around to in case of banking, most banks are going to operate under the open auth or the open authorization, where it's going to be able to pull back more than 90 days worth of data. Sometimes you're going to actually have to go in there and say, you know, I've been operating on, say, Excel for 2 years. Well, I've got more than, say, 6 months worth of data. I've got to actually import all this into QuickBooks. Well, in those cases, your bank's probably going to have what's known as a CSV file, comma separated value, that you can use as well. It's going to show up in an Excel platform, and you can actually import those transactions, assuming you have some issues, perhaps if the bank's not fully participating in open auth. I've done that before. I actually did that a couple of weeks ago with another client. One of the things I'll recommend is if you are importing prior bank data, right? So this is where you've already got an existing business, you're transitioning to QuickBooks Online, but you want to make sure everything's in there. You're going to need to download the CSV file from your bank. And two, you're going to want to open up that file. It either needs to be in 3 or 4 column format. A lot of times it's relating to the date, the transaction, the amount. Sometimes you can break it up into 4. QBO will actually can show you on their page to make sure that your file is formatted correctly. You may have more columns, you can delete some of them, but the main thing here is if it's over 1,000 rows, it's not going to import. And what's unusual is sometimes it won't show up that message. It'll be hidden away on another page. And so understand if you have, say, 1,500 records or transactions that you're trying to import, you're going to need to turn that into 2 files. Why? Because it's going to see the limit. Now, as long as you're under that 1,000 for that variety, it's going to import. You have those columns. It's going to be able to match them and bring all that information in. So some of this is you literally just going into QuickBooks and identifying your bank where you log in through the accounting, their routing number, you'll identify the correct financial institution. But some of those times, once again, if there's too much information in the past that is not being fully imported on an automatic basis, you're going to have to do the manual work and bring it in, because that's key. You know, you'll find on a lot of these accounts with QuickBooks, there is an opening balance. When you import things into QuickBooks, it's going to ask you, what is that opening balance, right? Because if you're a startup for this variety, it's going to be really simple. But once again, I mean, if you're coming in from, say, 3 years of operation and finally getting over to this platform, you're going to have to ensure that the balances are correct to begin with, because reconciliation is important. So once again, it goes to both the banks and the credit cards. The credit cards, because once again, a lot of businesses are trying to build business credit. They want to keep their Paydex score high. So therefore, they're constantly using the credit card, but it's not actually going through the checking account for the business yet. Therefore, you can synchronize that to ensure everything is going well. QuickBooks Online has gotten a lot better too about the matching when it comes in from the connections of banks and or credit cards. And sometimes they'll be able to identify, hey, you already have something in there. This could be a duplicate. Let's actually, in this case, match it. It just really depends on the setup that you've got for it. But I really want to stress that. First thing, chart of accounts. You know, I'd suggest you work in tandem with your CPA on that as well. Get the connections. Lock in banking, lock in the credit card. Because otherwise, we have the issue or the dilemma I like to call validity versus reliability. Validity, valid, you know, you plug numbers into a formula or a model, it gives you an output. Well, QuickBooks is going to always be valid. Unless something actually goes broken in the program, it will always be valid for that. It will give you an output. You will have a report produced for that. I cannot guarantee it is reliable. Reliability is up to you to ensure that everything is processed properly. Now, as you can see over here, the other thing we have is apps. So let's say you get most of your payments through PayPal. Okay, great. Well, what if you use Square? In this case, perhaps if you use Clover for inventory management. There's so many things your business is actually going to operate under. They're different software packages. The nice thing is you have the ability to synchronize these apps into QuickBooks. There is a tab for apps on that, and you can see what the apps are out there. Now, please understand, a lot of these apps are third parties. They may work really well, and they may not work so. I've seen both. I've seen a streamless transition to synchronize an app, great. I've seen within one case of my client where it overstated the income twice, essentially doubled it. And we ended up having to just break the connection and restart from scratch. So understand there may be some trial and error. These apps are usually produced by third parties that are synchronizing with QBO. Therefore, you want to ensure that they're working well. You may actually find there's 2 apps on certain POS or point of sale systems. For that case, you want to always make sure you're going with the user reviews. You can see that the user reviews in real time within the platform to say, okay, this one's probably better off for what I need. But once again, I mean, you may have multiple apps that are required for your business. Great. Go ahead and get this right. Because usually it's about the structure. I mean, we're considering a business right, no different than building a business plan. We want the foundation to be solid. You do all 3 of these, it's going to help for that process. Now, there are some other things that go into the flow of automation. Like if you're asking, you know, in this case, do I need a good invoice template? Well, yes, that's part of the automation process. You know, you got to ask yourself too. I mean, there's other things QuickBooks can do we're probably not going to get into today, but, you know, if you want to keep track of projects or classes, any of these things, you're going to have to actually go in and tell it to establish and enable to begin with. But I bring up invoicing for one reason. With the invoicing variety, you actually can go in and set a template. Like if you were using your phone to set this up, you know, let's say you're on QB Essentials, it's probably going to give you the option if you say, hey, yeah, I actually need invoicing, it's going to allow you to set up your invoice template. Otherwise, you can do it manual. It really just depends on the platform that you're on. But you can set those up, customize them to your needs, upload your company logo onto it, and have it ready. Once again, we want to get these foundation principles in place to begin with, because if we do, it's going to work for us. If you don't, it's probably going to have come into me or somebody else down the road, and it's just going to be several hours of stress just to get this right. And once again, I stress doing this right from the beginning, and it'll alleviate said stress. Now, I did briefly mention this earlier, that QuickBooks operates under the accounting principles. Yes, that famous identity equation is going to be true here. Your asset is equal to your liabilities plus your equities, because your asset is something that you have and it's functioning. You either paid for it via debt, or in this case, you paid for it because you actually had the money and you truly own it, rather than simply having the current title that may be repossessed in the future. Okay. Once again, this is an identity equation, but QuickBooks is operating under it. And you can see, yes, this is part of the balance sheet. Yes, you can actually produce a real-time balance sheet for it. You'll find if you're a corporation or a partnership, you'll notice when you have to file your taxes, the IRS requires you to, particularly that of the Schedule L, if I'm not mistaken. Well, guess what? If you're operating under QuickBooks, you have reliable information in here. All you got to do is a simple click, and there is your balance sheet. It's going to help tremendously. You need a bank loan in the future. They may say, you're an existing business. I want to know what's going on with your balance sheet. Shoot, if you even want to benchmark your business, you can do everything as a percentage of total assets. Guess what? You have a balance sheet that's both valid and reliable. We can do so as well. But once again, I want to stress that QuickBooks behind the scenes is still operating under that of GAAP. So just FYI, the more you know, the better off you're going to have with this. Now, one of the things I do enjoy about QuickBooks is the ability to switch instantaneously with reports in regards to accounting methods. Now, assuming we have a strong foundation, right? We got reliable information. With these reports, you can click a button and determine cash basis accounting or accrual basis accounting. Cash basis accounting is really simple. It's not revenue until it actually enters your bank account. It's not an expense until it leaves it. While you may say that's not perhaps attractive to an investor, it's not going to have a smooth process. Accrual will help on that front. With the accrual process, right, we're looking at things such as the matching principle, revenue recognition. Did you actually earn all that revenue? Is all of that expense actually incurred? You have the ability to produce these reports by simply clicking a button, assuming the information once again has been put in correctly. But I do want to stress this, you have that capability. Most companies are going to operate under cash basis accounting anyways. You know, if you're, say, corporation, you got inventory, you're doing quite a bit in sales, particularly that of several million, you're probably going to be stuck with accrual basis accounting. There are some exemptions, right? But for the most part, businesses operate under the cash basis analysis. When you file your taxes, it even asks you on a Schedule C, which one are you using, cash or accrual? So I do want to stress that you have the options to run reports on either of those fronts. At its core, QuickBooks is operating under essentially four things: the customers / jobs, it's got the vendors, it's got the accounts, it's got the items. Items are usually the things that show up perhaps, say, on your invoice, right? It's something that you are setting. You really don't actually pull that directly out of QuickBooks. It's more in the background. What you will see directly in QuickBooks are the customers, the vendors, the accounts. Why with the accounts? You set up the chart of accounts. I told you this is what QuickBooks operates under. You have your accounts receivable. You've got literally perhaps a bank account with, say, Bank of America or Security Federal, Wells Fargo. I mean, the list goes on. And each of those are an account. Now with the customers / jobs, well, these are the people that are actually bringing in your revenue. I mean, you could actually be a retail base where you're just having the bulk sales being imported through with the app connection. Great. You may actually have clients with specific jobs. In those cases, QuickBooks can operate as a CRM, a customer relationship management system. It's rudimentary, but it will get the job done. It allows you to keep track of who they are, their information, and there's a fun feature that comes along with invoicing as well. The vendors, those are the people that you are, in this case, are paying. Now, I want to stress the vendors are not your employees. Yeah, you got W-2 employees, that's going to be treated differently. But vendors are the rest. You know, it could be the equivalent of a contract that you have to fulfill, you know, pay someone to do restoration on your place of business. This could be also in the case of simply you've got to pick up batteries from a store. Any of these things can be listed as vendors. So once again, you have the database component for it. But in essence, QuickBooks is using all four in tandem. It really depends on what extent with your company, okay? But in essence, if we had to break it down into four things, And that first, of course, would always be the account, because it's usually trying to tie in for that scenario. Now, this is something I am going to demo on further, but it's related to the QuickBooks test drive. So with QBO, if you're asking yourself, is this actually a good platform for me? You have two options. Number one, you could do a free trial. With the free trials case, you can actually import your information in and see how that relates to you. If you decide, you know what, that seems like too much work, or I'm worried about it and, getting charged down the road, fret not. You can run what's known as the QBO test drive. And this is a link that I'm going to share with you. You have the capability to see every facet of QuickBooks. And if you decide to accidentally break it, don't worry, all you have to do is refresh the page and you'll be good to go from there. If any of you actually do Pro Advisor training to become certified in QuickBooks, you will use the test drive for training purposes. But I also like you to have the capability to see everything that's in there, because if you get a free trial for that case, once again, you are going to actually be putting your information in. If you just want to play around with a sample company, use the test drive. But as you can see here, it's just showing a good workflow for the issues at hand. I need to move this to the side so I can even see my side of the screen. But you'll notice I got the customers up front, I got the jobs, I got the estimates, I got the invoicing. Well, these are things that may function depending on the type of business that you are. If, say, you're focusing on a landscaper, if you were a contracting business, you're probably going to be using all of these in play. Some businesses may only use simply the invoicing. They come in, they know their rate for what they're doing, like a landscaper. They get the work done, they charge for the invoice, and they're able to get paid. But it is able to show you the different forms that we can use for the workspace. But you'll notice it's got the thing with the money in, it's working its all the way to sending invoices, tracking times, to receiving payments. Okay. Now, the fun thing I do always want to stress down there is you have the ability to talk to your accountant. Now, you can actually pay into it to help you through the process. But more importantly, if your accountant is actually tied into your QuickBooks account, you can send them a simple message saying, hey, I'm actually worried about this portion of it. Can you help me solve the problem? And they're able to do so. As a QuickBooks Pro Advisor, which most CPAs are, they'll actually have a different variation of QuickBooks show up. In essence, we'll have the ability to actually see the books of everyone who is under our case or who's given us admin access. In my case, I'm not a CPA, so I'm able to just see from my Pro Advisor account to see who has given me admin access and therefore where I can pull the reports. With your CPA, that's going to show up across the board. They're going to actually be able to go in, edit if you need help with reconciliation, etc. Okay. But once again, I wanted to show you that the user interface is pretty streamlined for these days. It's not as extensive as perhaps QuickBooks Desktop. QuickBooks Desktop had a much higher learning curve, but once you got the curve in place, you felt pretty good and you were able to actually see it has more capabilities. With QuickBooks Online, it's maybe perhaps shrunk in terms of the capabilities, but once again, the streamlining process has certainly helped the clients be able to get through and get everything that's needed. Okay. But once again, I'm just throwing it out there so you can see the flow. In this case, the flow is looking at it from you add your products and services. If you've got inventory set up, say perhaps through Plus or Advanced, that's going to show up as well. You can, in this case, manage the customers. That's going to literally be the customer relationship database. It's going to show who they are. You work your way through in terms of what they've done in the past and purchasing, etc. Now, most likely, you may not actually be dealing with the estimates. If that's something, we can talk about that further off this webinar. But you may be dealing with the invoicing. And so if you've got an invoicing template set up, you can actually work through that. You can establish the pricing, pull through, see perhaps if it's a number of parts that you're delivering, what's the quantity, and of course with the payment. And that's something I really love about QBO now. QBO actually has the payment capability. Not only can you invoice electronically to the client, but also too, they can be paid through QuickBooks. And one of the things now you'll notice with QuickBooks is they're allowing for your QuickBooks bank account. You can actually get a bank account through QBO for that variety. And if I'm not mistaken, if you put money away on the savings account, they're actually paying some interest on 5%. That's not for all cases, but it is one of the new features they've been debuting. I really enjoy the QuickBooks payment because it just makes it easier, or in this case, the customer, the client, to pay the business. That money's coming in quicker for that case. You're functioning through a secure platform, and it's just helping you improve your cash flow further. All right. Now, once again, if you notice at the bottom here, you'll see reports and trends, and that's something that I especially focus on with my clients. Particularly, I'm always wanting to pull the reports. I get admin access. I go into these accounts and are able to pull the reports needed. Particularly what I'm focused on is the first, and that is the P&L, profit and loss, the income statement. The P&L has several things. You have a P&L overall. You also have a P&L by monthly breakdown. You have a P&L detail. The detail actually shows me the individual transactions associated with each account. Okay. And in this case, the accounts are simply things that you see in terms of revenue or expenses. The other elements are functioning on the balance sheet. The P&L monthly breakdown allows me, perhaps, if you need to get a bank loan, well, the first thing I'm going to do is export that in Excel, the P&L monthly analysis, and use that as the foundation for the pro forma. Why? Because it's your actuals, assuming the information in there is actually reliable. Okay, that's why we want to make sure we reconcile. Any of these three are immediately used. Now, FYI, if you happen to have your CPA help you manage QuickBooks, some clients don't even actually get their own QuickBooks. They pay the CPA to set up their own account through that firm, accounting firm. And a lot of times they get exports in PDF. I will tell you, if you can preferably get it exported in Excel. And if you have complete access, you are paying for QuickBooks, you can do so in the click of a button. PDFs are more appropriate for your reports that you're giving to somebody for that variety. If you're needing to use this to build a pro forma or do data modeling, we want an Excel export for that case. Other things that occur on here, the balance sheet, your assets, your liabilities, your equity. You can also export balance sheet or profit and loss as a percentage of either sales, in the case of the profit and loss, or as a percentage of total assets with the balance sheet. You're actually able to benchmark the business further. We do that routinely with businesses because QuickBooks by default is keeping track of records, right? But we want to go a step further. We want to get into the analysis. What are the analytics associated with your business? We're able to actually, here at SBDC, pull the industry benchmarks. Everything is a percentage of sales or everything is a percentage of total assets for a typical industry. And we can compare that to your results that are produced through these reports. Quite beneficial. That way we're able to make better recommendations on how to improve some things. Not to mention too, if you need to have aging accounts receivable and aging accounts payable, this is important. So you can have the full detailed analysis of this, where it breaks up into, all right, this is 0 to 30 days, this is 31 to 60, we're working our way to 90, and anything past that, if it's accounts receivable, we're probably going to write off as a bad debt. That's account receivable, the money coming in. Sometimes you need to be up to date on your own vendors, whose bills that you owe to, right? And how far have they aged? Sometimes a bank may need this. Sometimes it's just to your benefit to ensure that you are paying off all your bills or perhaps bringing in all the revenue that is needed. And one of the other things up here is the customer segmentation. I really enjoy this. Now, you can do this several ways. You can break up by customers. You can break this up sometimes by looking at location, assuming you set up QuickBooks properly. But please understand, these are just sample reports. These are the reports I usually work with as a consultant. You go into the report tab, you will notice the plethora of options is much larger. And you can customize reports. You can set some as favorites. You just put a simple star on it. You can actually do the equivalent of management reports. There's so many options out there for you, but you have to figure out which ones are right for you. I just wanted to stress these four. Why? Because they're usually probably going to be the ones you're going to turn to in terms of business analytics and making the best decisions. And just a fun feature out there too, if you decide, hey, I don't want to get checks from my company, you can do the equivalent of checks through QBO, assuming you're going to pay for the actual check paper. But a lot of people are turning away and going towards the email function. They'll just send that invoice there directly to the customer. They'll use the QuickBooks Online payment. The customer will pay through that. They get paid in a secure and fast manner. And in that case, they're not using as much paper. So a lot of things have transitioned. Another fun feature I really enjoy about QuickBooks, and I think it's so important from not only a security standpoint, but if you were ever to be audited. So QuickBooks has the ability to do what's known as receipt capture. And so a lot of times clients are like, I have my books, right? But it's a file, or in this case, the platform. But what about my physical receipts? Well, it's always good to keep track of those physical receipts, right? Create a binder for those, if you want to have the hard copies. But if you want a digital copy as well, and one that's actually correlated through your business account, you can use the receipt capture within QuickBooks to ensure that those images are in there. If you're ever to be audited for that case, you could simply have the image pulled out. Now, once again, I do always recommend keeping hold of the actual receipts for that case, but it's another fun feature that QuickBooks can certainly benefit you as well. Now, I am going to pull up the test drive really quick, but I did want to go through a few other things that you can see, and we've talked about them briefly. And these are some of the things that you'll notice when I actually use the test drive for it. Number one is Ask My Accountant, which I've talked about briefly already. You can give your accountant access into your books. You can also use the Intuit bookkeeping experts as well, that you will end up probably paying for their continued assistance. But you'll notice there's some other alternatives as well. The Employee Center, the Tax Center, and the mileage. By keeping track of mileage, your business may want to deduct the miles that are actually incurred. If I'm not mistaken, the current IRS mileage rate for this year is about 67 cents per mile. You have the ability to do so. But if you're ever audited, you got to have a log for those miles. The best way probably is use QuickBooks. You can use Excel. You can only use an old sheet of paper, but QuickBooks will allow you to actually track the mileage, the dates, the purpose of the trip, and of course, the mileage. But the tax center also is beneficial. And this is in relation to things such as your sales tax payable. If you go into the test drive, you will notice this showing up. Sometimes I believe they'll use the equivalent of the Arizona Department of Revenue for one of the sample companies for this. But you're able to see what are the tax that are required, or in this case, perhaps if you have to file like what's known as ST3 or ST389 for South Carolina. And of course, you have the option for the Employee Center. Now, one of the nice things too that QuickBooks can do is when it comes tax time, right? You have to issue, say, to contractors 1099s. You can do so through QuickBooks. Now, with QuickBooks Payroll, that's another option that is technically separate from QuickBooks Online, because the four platforms that showed you, they are just more for the record keeping purpose, the connections, the reports. But if you do need to keep track of payroll, you want to do proper withholding, you can use QuickBooks Payroll. One of the best options out there that's going to be pricey is QuickBooks Payroll Elite. So with the Elite option, yes, it is the most expensive one out there, but it does give you protection in the case there is ever an issue with tax calculations. And so if I'm not mistaken, what is it, up to like $15,000 in protection? Essentially, it acts as a form of insurance if something were to be improperly calculated, and you would actually have a larger tax bill and perhaps some penalties associated with it. So you're able to manage, of course, everything going on with employees. You can go as in-depth as PTO with paid time off in terms of vacations, but it certainly, with QuickBooks Payroll, allow you to actually manage things with FICA. You know, you're having to pull 7.65% out of the paycheck. You're having to match that case, but you'll have other things that may actually show up before there, you know, like pulling out health insurance, you know, pulling out retirement, those pre-tax items. And then, of course, you have your state and federal withholding. So you'll notice a lot of withholding in that case can get tricky because you may be looking at how often you're paying them and seeing the ranges both on the federal side and the state side. And so in those cases, QuickBooks Payroll can be extremely beneficial with that. A lot of people end up actually transitioning to QuickBooks Payroll if they're worried about the cost, because if you have a CPA that helps you out with doing payroll for W-2 employees, you may be looking at $250 per month and then having a charge per employee. In that case, QuickBooks Payroll may be more advantageous in the future if you're worried about actually the budgeting of it. So you have to understand those are the things that are associated with hiring an employee, but it's not going to apply for every business. If you're a single member LLC, this may not be necessary, but I did want to stress these are other features that we can work with for that case. Regarding those features as well, I mentioned the spreadsheet sync. This is something that's only available to the advanced variety, but I actually like it. The only issue I see with it at the moment is this. So the idea here is you can take the information from QuickBooks, bring it into Excel, run your analytical reports, you can make some adjustments, and then you can batch, in this case, upload it back into QuickBooks. That works really well when it's the client base. But see, for someone such as myself, as the consultant, I only have admin access. And one of the things that probably we'll be looking forward to improving in the future, and I really will be excited to see when that's capable, is the ability to actually, as the pro advisor, have the ability to do the spreadsheet sync on client files. They're not my own. in that case, if I'm helping a client in that case, look through in data model, we can actually pull that information directly. Now that's only with advanced, right? And it's a great feature. It is expensive, but on those cases, please don't feel like you're limited with data modeling if you don't have access to the advanced option. You can still export all of the data manually into Excel. I like to say QuickBooks and Excel should work in tandem because Excel is superb for data modeling. QuickBooks Online is more for keeping track of the records and producing the reports. And so Spreadsheet Sync is essentially acting as the bridge between those two gaps. As I mentioned again, the QuickBooks Only for online options, desktop has been phased out. In those cases, there's still options out there that you can get, just you're not going to see any updates ever put towards that. One of the things Intuit will help with is a free setup. Anything beyond that may end up costing you $50 further, or if you're looking for an Intuit expert. Yes, the timesheet, that's something I really haven't talked about too much. In this case, they can be integrated as well. I've had clients ask me too, if I'm using timesheets from another platform or using Excel, can these things be imported as well? Yes, they can. And last but not least, I talked about payroll. So payroll has several options out there. Elite is just looking at the highest option, but it has the tax liability protection that comes along with it, and thus making it attractive to businesses that are using W-2 employees for that case. Now, I am going to briefly stop screen sharing here, and I'm going to go into the test drive. So that link, when you pull it up, will look something like this. It'll ask you if you're a robot. No, we're not. So we're going to pull up the test drive of a company. Like I said, if you want to use the free demo, you can. You would like the trial basis, actually put your company into this. This is a fake company. If you ever do training for QuickBooks Online, you'll notice Craig's Design and Landscaping Services, you're always going to be the famous one. It has the ability to do the tour, but in essence, we're going to do our own right here. Now, we can go into the dashboards. In this case, we're already in the home, but it'll show us if we have tasks. Now, this is a fake company, right? But you'll notice there are a lot of things that we've talked about here today will show up. I've got not only one, but 2 bank accounts already connected here. They're fake, obviously, but we can see what's going on with the balances. We've also got 2 credit cards here as well. Now, if you notice in this scenario, they're looking for things to review. That gets into, in this case, making sure that things are matched properly. We also have our fund dashboard in terms of the profit and loss here. We're able to actually use a donut chart for the expense breakdown. And we can see everything going on for the spending. Apparently, it's down 57% from the last month. All right. The net profit, however, is a negative number. That would be great for our employees for that scenario. We're able to see what's going on with their invoicing. And we even have a cash flow trend down here for 2 months at the case. If we wanted to actually see what was going on with the bank transactions, we could see that. Now, this is something that you can put out there. I haven't really talked about it. You can do bank rules. And so the idea here is when transactions are imported, that they're automatically going to put them in the appropriate category. You can do that. If you want something informal, because rules are formal, you want to do something informal to actually keep track of things, you can use what's known as a tag. A tag is informal, but it can be really assigned to most things in QuickBooks and allow you to actually group similar transactions, etc. Rules are more official for this. And once again, you always want to make sure that the rules are functioning properly for that scenario. We also, in this case, had the receipts I talked about. Great thing for record keeping as well. And it'll actually break it down into the cases of the app transactions and the bank transactions. I talked about customers, right? Well, QuickBooks will function as the equivalent of a customer relationship database. I'm able to see all the customers put in the company. I mean, if we were to create a new one, right, this is how it would show up for this variety. So we could set everything from the address, any attachments, the primary payment method, how they're being put together. And if this was not a new company, if it was let's say you've been operating under QuickBooks for several months or several years, you were importing the data. One of those things you want to make sure is what's going on with any opening balance of customers. It may probably be 0, but sometimes that is not the case. So if we're looking over here, I talked about time. That's another option. I'd also talked about this case, the employees. I don't know if any employees exist on this sample right now. Apparently they do, Emily and John for that variety. We also have the capability to look at contractors. I talked about preparing 1099s in this case. That is the ability to do so through QuickBooks. You'll notice you have everything from the commerce. We talked about the apps, right? So we can go over here to the app overview. So apparently in this one, they're using Dex, an online backup, and Shopify. But if we wanted to, you could search for these cases and it'll show you the leading apps like QuickBooks Time. That technically is an app that we want for that variety. We could also look in this case for other elements at play. In this case, what do we have? Amazon Seller Connector by QuickBooks. We're able to see everything that's put through. I talked about the reviews, right? So apparently this one has 121 reviews, only coming in at 2.8 out of 5. So you kind of have to consider the things that show up at play here for this variety. But once again, it's something to put in the back of your mind as you go forward. Apologize, I've got a slight issue with the screen sharing here. I'm gonna have to reshare for a second. Bear with me 1 second, folks. I apologize, my browser had closed out of it, so I'm gonna pull this back up again. And the link will always be available. It's never going to be expired. So feel free to use it at your discretion. Right, I'm coming back up here. I will reshare my screen. I know we're coming to about 5 minutes, so I can pull this up at the same time in the background, but Carolyn, I do want to go through the chat and see any other questions that are coming through. Devin, what's the link? Yes, this link will be provided, and you can use it anytime that you'd like for QuickBooks across the board. I did want to talk briefly about the reports. Apparently, since there's no other questions in the moment, here's everything I was referencing before. Like we've got accounts receivable at the aging summary. I can type in anything that I want. I'm going to pull up the profit and loss, and I'm going to do by month. And so essentially what this will do is give me the equivalent of a pro forma. Now it's only got, in this case, 2 months going on for this year because it's operating in tandem with the calendar. Wanted to change this to cash, I could rerun the report. If I wanted to export, I have the ability to do so to Excel or PDF for those varieties. So once again, feel free to play around with this. You cannot break it. If you do, just reload the link and it will work perfectly. Now, let me go briefly back to the PowerPoint, the last 2 slides, just showing you additional resources that are at hand. Now, if you want to have a full list of potential QuickBooks tutorials, this is a good YouTube page. My prior colleague, Earl Gregorich, wanted to include in this case another option, in this case with Jeanette Sullivan. He's worked routinely with their company in that case for pro advisors. Obviously, we can never push someone directly for that case, but this is someone that he had seen help a lot of our clients routinely. I, as a pro advisor, can help. You can actually research through a QuickBooks, the pro advisors, a full list directory of every pro advisor who's made their public profile enable for businesses such as yourself to actually utilize their services. Now, here's the thing. If you come to some of those services, they may actually have a payment for that. So just FYI, if you come to any SBDC consultant, such as myself as a pro advisor, there's no charge for what we do. But it's one of those things, just throwing out there additional resources depending on the level and depth. I'm not going to go into journal entries for you directly. I usually save those for CPAs, but we can look to make sure that the chart of accounts is established correctly, make sure the connections are working properly, and also to being able to pull the correct reports and thus discern the information from analytics at hand. But if you have any other questions, this is my contact information. So some of you may have known I used to be a professor at USC Aiken. I've transitioned full-time to SBDC, so therefore I have a new email address as functioning as a full-time SBDC consultant. So feel free to send me an email on that case. I can get you signed up as a client. Not going to cost you anything. It'll take 5 minutes and we can go from there. Usually we do about Zoom interviews for about 30 minutes and then set up follow-up consultations as needed.